Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The arrow struck the alien tree 3 inches from David Hale's skull. The thump echoed like a death knell. Carbon fiber shaft buried so deep in the purple weeping bark that only the fletching showed. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Blood from a gash across his forehead had sealed his left eye shut. His flight suit hung in carbon-scored tatters, the fabric so soaked with his own blood it squelched with every movement. Each breath came as a wet rasp through what felt like broken glass in his chest. The scrap of hide tied to the arrow fluttered in the oppressive humidity, its message clear in any language. 60 seconds to surrender, or join the bones that littered this valley floor. David's hands shook as memory hit him like a physical blow. Anna, 7 years old, perched in his pilot's seat during a routine maintenance stop. "Daddy, what happens if the ship breaks and we're all alone?" He'd shown her the emergency protocols, made it into a game. You find shelter first, little star. Then you find water. Then you wait for help to come. She'd made him repeat it until she could recite it back perfectly, her small fingers dancing over the control panels like a pianist learning scales. "But what if you can't wait?" she'd asked with the terrible prescience of childhood. "Then you fix what's broken," he'd said, lifting her onto his lap so she could reach the diagnostic controls. "Because machines are like people, sweetheart. They want to live. You just have to listen to what they're telling you." Now she was alone, and he was her only hope. "Anna!" The sound tore from his throat like shattered metal. He scrambled higher up the blood-slick rocks, his vision blurring as he searched the twisted wreckage of the Stargazer. The escape pod bay gaped empty, a dark wound where his daughter should have been safe. "Anna!" The 61st second arrived with the scent of oiled leather and something metallic. Old blood, maybe, or weapon oil. They materialized from the crimson undergrowth like nightmares given flesh. 12 women with skin the color of deep ocean, their lean bodies moving with predatory silence. Bone ornaments clicked softly as they breathed. The musk of their alien sweat carried notes of copper and something floral that made his sinuses burn. Their spearheads caught the filtered light like captured stars. Nyla stepped from the shadows, taller than the rest, her ridge-browed face a mask of cold assessment. She'd seen crashed pilots before, dozens of them over the years. They ran screaming into the forest. They fought with desperate fury. They fell to their knees and begged for mercy in languages she didn't understand. This one did something that made her blood freeze. He screamed a forbidden thing, a child's name. Not whispered in prayer or carved in morning stone, but hurled at the sky like a weapon. "Anna!" he roared again, the sound tearing his throat raw. The hunting party exchanged glances. Several made warding gestures. To speak a child's name aloud was to invite the attention of death itself. Every parent knew this. Yet this sky man violated the oldest taboo as if it meant nothing. He climbed higher, fingers scrabbling on blood-slick stone, his attention focused on the twisted wreckage with the intensity of a starving scavenger. He didn't see the spears tracking his movement, didn't notice 12 expert killers flanking him from 3 sides. All he saw was the missing escape pod and the hollow space where his daughter should have been. Nyla raised her fist. The hunters tensed, but something in the man's broken voice made her hesitate. She'd heard that sound before, in the throats of mothers whose children had been taken by the deep forest. It was the sound of a soul being flayed alive. "Take him," she commanded, her voice barely above a whisper. They moved like water, silent and swift. David's hands slipped on blood-slick stone. He tumbled into their arms without resistance, his voice breaking into a hoarse whisper. "Anna!" The hunt was over. Yet as Nyla looked down at their captive, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She had captured something dangerous, not a warrior or a threat, but something far more unsettling. A man whose world had been reduced to a single, terrible word. They kept him in a woven cage beneath the speaking tree, where the scent of old judgments hung thick in the air. The elders circled like carrion birds, their voices sharp with ancient fury. "He defiles our customs," Elder Kess hissed, her milky eyes fixed on the huddled figure, speaking the child name to the open sky, calling death down on all our young ones. "Kill him," Elder Morn whispered, "before his sky madness spreads." Nala stood before the cage, her knuckles white where they gripped her spear. The man sat with his back against the woven bars, clutching something to his chest like a talisman against despair. But the way he held it, gentle as a prayer, protective as a shield, spoke of love, not madness. "The name he speaks," she said, her voice cutting through the elder's whispers. "What if it isn't defiance? What if it's hope?" "Blasphemy," Kess spat. "You were not raised to speak such. Among our people, we whisper the names of children only to the earth," Elder Morn said, his voice heavy with tradition, "to protect them from the attention of hungry spirits. Yet he shouts this name like a war cry." "What is Anna?" Neela demanded, turning to face the prisoner. The man's head rose slowly, as if the simple act of lifting it required enormous effort. His bloodshot eyes met hers, not with the wild look of the broken, but with the terrible clarity of someone who had lost everything except purpose. "She's 8, he whispered, his voice like gravel on metal. "Likes to take apart broken things and put them back together better than before. Asks 1,000 questions about everything. Sleeps with this." He opened his arms to reveal the small bundle. A child's doll, battered and stained, one button eye dangling by a thread. Because it was her mother's, before the plague took her. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the elder's whispers died away. "Your offspring," Elder Kess said finally, the word heavy with realization. "You call down death's attention on your own blood." "Where I come from," David said, his voice gaining strength, "we believe that speaking their names keeps them alive. That love is stronger than whatever wants to take them from us. That a father's voice can call his daughter back from the very edge of darkness." His eyes never left Neela's face. "She's out there, hurt, maybe dying. And while we debate theology, she's waiting for her father to come find her." Neela felt something twist in her chest, a recognition she didn't want to acknowledge. The desperate mathematics of parenthood, the willingness to trade everything, including taboos and customs and the approval of others, for one more heartbeat in a small chest. "This is madness," Kess whispered. "To help him find the child is to doom us all. The spirits can burn," Nyla snapped, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "Search the crash trail. Look for the child." The gasps from the council were immediate and venomous. But Neela was already moving, her authority cutting through tradition like a blade through rotten cloth. "Move!" On the second day, the scouts returned carrying a burden wrapped in leaves. Anna. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, her small body limp as wet cloth. Her dark hair was matted with sap and debris. A deep gash ran along her ribs where metal had torn through her emergency suit. Her breathing was shallow, barely visible. David's transformation was instant and terrible. The hollow man vanished, replaced by something fierce and focused. He surged against the cage walls, his voice no longer broken, but commanding. "Let me out! She needs medical attention. Now!" For a heartbeat, Nyla hesitated. Then she saw the way he looked at the child. Not with the obsession of madness, but with the desperate precision of love. She unlatched the cage. He didn't flee. He dropped to his knees beside his daughter, his bloodied hands impossibly gentle as they checked her pulse, examined her wounds. "She's dying," Elder Kess hissed from the circle of watchers. "The sky curse is in her blood. We must let her pass to spare the village." "No!" David's voice cut like a blade as he tore strips from his flight suit to clean Anna's wounds. "She lives." "The crash brought evil," Elder Morn added. "Her death will appease. Touch her, and I'll kill you." David didn't look up from his work, but something in his tone made the elder step back. "All of you." The village healer, Ancient Vera, brought clay bowls filled with bitter tea, roots that dulled pain, moss that prevented wounds from turning bad. David accepted everything with desperate gratitude, working with techniques the healers recognized but had never seen performed with such focused intensity. "She burns with fever," Kess whispered. "The spirits reject her. The spirits can go to hell." David bathed Anna's forehead with cool water as her small body shuddered. "Fever breaks toxins down. Her immune system is fighting. She needs fluids, warmth, time." For 2 days, he never left her side. When the elders whispered about mercy killings and necessary deaths, he snarled at them like a feral animal. When Anna cried out in delirium, he held her hand and sang soft songs in a language Nyla didn't recognize. On the second night, Anna's breathing stopped. David's hands flew to her throat, checking for pulse, for any sign of life. Seconds stretched into eternity. No breath, no movement, just terrible stillness. The lodge door burst open. Elder Kess entered with Elder Morn, their faces set in grim determination. In Kess's weathered hands gleamed a ritual blade, its edge honed to surgical sharpness. "The suffering must end," she intoned. "It is mercy." "Get away from her," David snarled, but exhaustion had left him weak as a child. "The spirits have spoken," Morn added, stepping closer. "She lingers between worlds, neither living nor dead. We free her." Neela appeared in the doorway like an avenging shadow. Her knife found Kess's throat before the old woman could react, the blade drawing a thin line of blood. "One more step and you follow her to whatever afterlife you preach," Neela whispered. David ignored them all, his hands working frantically. 1, 2, 3. He compressed Anna's tiny chest, feeling ribs flex beneath his palms. Then he sealed his mouth over hers, breathing his own life into her still lungs. 4, 5, 6. "This is abomination," Kess hissed against the knife at her throat. 7, 8, 9. Anna's chest hitched, a tiny gasp. Then another. Color flooded back into her lips as oxygen reached her brain. "Don't you dare," David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Don't you dare leave me too." The elders backed away, their faces pale with something between awe and terror. But Kess's eyes held a different light, the cold fire of a debt that would be collected. "There will be a price for this not work of death and life," she whispered. "The spirits always demand payment." The threat hung in the air like smoke. David cradled his breathing daughter and wondered what that price might be. On the third night, her fever broke. "Daddy?" Anna's voice was thin as spider silk, but it was enough. The elders who had called for her death now crossed themselves and muttered about miracles. David simply kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm here, little star." "Daddy's here." 3 days without sleep finally claimed him. David collapsed beside Anna's sleeping mat, his body hitting the woven floor like a felled tree. Nyla found him there at dawn, unconscious, a fresh wound on his arm weeping blood onto the healing herbs. She worked in silence, cleaning the gash with practiced efficiency. Her hands were gentle despite their calluses, warriors' hands that knew both how to kill and how to heal. David stirred as she bound the wound with clean cloth. "Anna, sleep safely," Nyla said quietly. "As should you." "Can't. If she wakes and I'm not..." "Why did you scream her name?" The question came soft as a blade between ribs. "In our culture, it calls death's attention to the child." David met her eyes, seeing something there he hadn't expected. Not judgment, but genuine curiosity. "So she'd know where to come back to," he said simply. In all the darkness, in all the pain, she'd hear her father's voice calling her home. Their gazes held for a heartbeat longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between them. Then a shout from outside shattered the moment. One of the watchers calling alarm about strange tremors in the earth. Nyla was on her feet instantly, but she paused at the doorway. "Sleep," she commanded. "I'll watch over both of you." The weeks that followed brought gradual acceptance. Anna recovered with the frightening resilience of childhood, her laughter echoing through the village as she played with the local children. David worked alongside the hunters, reinforcing shelters and sharing his engineering knowledge. The real shift came during the tool blessing ceremony, when David accidentally placed his hand over Nyla's to steady a ceremonial blade they were sharpening together. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds. Warm skin against warm skin, steady pressure, shared purpose. Nyla yanked her hand back as if his touch had burned her, her face flushing deep blue. The watching crafters gasped, stepping backward. Then the whispers began, rising to angry shouts. "Mating claim! He dishonors the hunt leader! Exile the Sky Man!" Jorik grabbed David's arm, pulling him away from the growing crowd. "Are you insane?" Palm-to-palm contact. That's how mates claim each other. In public. The crowd's fury was building, spears being raised, voices calling for his immediate banishment. Only Nyla's sharp command for silence kept them from violence, but the damage was done. The air between them was now charged with something dangerous, something that could tear the village apart. Within minutes, the circle of words had formed, the ancient forum where disputes were settled and justice served. The entire village gathered, their faces grim with the weight of tradition violated. Elder Kess stood at the circle's heart, her voice carrying the authority of generations. Palm-to-palm contact before witnesses. The Skyman has claimed mating right over our hunt leader. This cannot stand. Exile him, someone shouted from the crowd. Brand him, called another. Nyla stepped forward, her hand resting on her blade's hilt. The contact was not sealed with blood binding or blade knot. By law, it was merely contact. Mere contact? Kess's voice dripped venom. You defend this outsider over your own people? I defend the law over mob passion. David found his voice, though exhaustion made it rough. I made an error. I didn't know your customs. He paused, meeting the hostile gazes around him. But I won't apologize for helping save a child's life. Not to anyone. The crowd erupted, half shouting for his blood, half grudgingly respecting his honesty. The village was splitting down the middle, families choosing sides, old alliances cracking. Then the ground shuddered beneath their feet. A watcher burst into the circle, her face white with terror. The earth shakes! The deep caves sing with movement. In that moment, their petty human conflicts seemed suddenly, terrifyingly small. The first signs came at dawn. Tremors that made water dance in clay bowls and sent the village dogs slinking toward their hiding places. Old Vera, the bone reader, emerged from her hut with eyes wide and wild. Something stirs in the deep places, she croaked, her arthritic hands clutching a collection of yellowed bones. The earth shakers wake from their long sleep. Superstition, Elder Kess muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. The tremors grew stronger as the day wore on, each one rattling teeth and stopping conversations mid-word. Children began to cry for no reason they could name. Hunting birds fled their roosts, streaming across the sky in ragged formations. The first signs had been subtle. Forest creatures fleeing their territories in silent processions, their usual calls replaced by ominous quiet. The hummingbirds, normally so numerous they darkened the sky, had simply vanished overnight. Then came the tremors that made water dance in clay bowls like living things. Children began suffering nosebleeds for no apparent reason, their small bodies sensing something their minds couldn't comprehend. Nyla pressed her palm flat against the earth outside the council circle. The ground was warm, unnaturally warm, as if something vast breathed beneath it. There's something down there, David said, kneeling beside her. Something big enough to generate its own heat signature. How big? She asked, though part of her didn't want to know. David's pilot training had included xenobiology surveys. He'd seen cave systems throughout the galaxy, mapped thermal signatures of hibernating megafauna. Big enough to swallow your village whole, he said quietly. That evening, Vera spread her bone collection before the council fire, her weathered fingers lifting a curved fang as long as her forearm. Grave maw teeth, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The last kings of the world, before the ice came and put them to sleep. 12 feet at the shoulder, claws that could split stone. The ground shuddered beneath them, stronger this time. In the distance, something roared, a sound like mountains screaming. Get the children to the deep shelters, Nyla commanded, rising to her feet. Hunters, form defensive positions. The splintering crash of breaking wood cut her off. The outer palisade, built from trees as thick as a man's torso, exploded inward in a shower of splinters and torn earth. Through the gap came a nightmare. The grave maw moved like controlled avalanche, 12 feet of muscle and bone, and perfectly evolved killing instinct. Its hide was armored in scales the color of dried blood, each one edged in black like ancient steel. But it was the eyes that froze her soul, intelligent, calculating, utterly without mercy. Spears, Nyla shouted, but her voice was lost in the screaming. The creature's massive head swung toward the village center with predatory focus, toward the children. Jorik was first to reach it, spear leveled, the hunting song of his ancestors on his lips. His iron point struck the creature's flank and skittered off armored scales like a toy. The grave maw's casual backhand caught him across the chest with a sound like breaking kindling. He hit the ground 20 feet away, his chest caved in, blood foaming from his lips as he whispered his sister's name like a prayer. Mira, run ... quote. Tam the Laughing called that because her joy was infectious as summer rain, rushed in from the left, aiming for the creature's eye. She had been making wooden toys for the children just that morning, her hands gentle and sure. Now those same hands gripped her spear as the grave maw's claws swept in a lazy arc, opening her from sternum to spine. Her laughter died in a wet gurgle as her organs spilled onto the packed earth. Her sister Kira watched from the healing lodge doorway, clutching her own infant son, her scream joining the chorus of the doomed. "Stay back," Neela commanded, but desperation made her hunters reckless. They pressed forward, iron points striking again and again. Most shattered against that impossible hide. The few that found purchase only seemed to enrage it further. Mira, barely 16, Jorik's sister, who always wore their grandmother's bone bracelet on her wrist, heard her brother's dying words and did the opposite. She drove her spear toward the creature's throat with the fury of fresh grief. The grave maw's jaws snapped shut on her weapon, on her arm, on the bracelet that had protected 3 generations of women. Her scream was brief, but would echo in the survivors' nightmares for years to come. The village square became a charnel house. Warriors who had faced storm bears and cliff cats without flinching were scattered like children's toys. Blood pooled in the packed earth, steaming in the cool evening air. A cry cut through the chaos, high, terrified, barely human. A village boy, no more than 10, lay trapped beneath a fallen support beam, his leg bent at an impossible angle. The grave maw's attention turned toward the sound of pain. David threw himself toward the child, his hands closing around the massive timber. His ribs screamed as he tried to lift it, but exhaustion and injury had left him weak. The beam might as well have been made of solid stone. "Help me!" he gasped. Nyla appeared beside him, her shoulder fitting against the wood beside his. Together they heaved, muscles straining, the beam rising inch by crucial inch. The boy scrambled free just as their strength gave out. The effort left them both vulnerable. The grave maw's massive claw swept down, catching Nyla across the back and hurling her into the council platform. She hit the wooden structure with a sickening crack, her spear spinning away into the darkness. David dragged the injured boy toward the healing lodge, his own vision blurring from the impact. Behind them, the creature's roar shook dust from the rafters. They had saved one life, but the debt between them had become something deeper, a bond forged in shared sacrifice. The grave maw swept its arm in a devastating arc, clearing the last defenders from its path. Nyla threw herself forward, spear braced against the ground, but the impact drove her to her knees. The shaft splintered in her hands. Pain exploded through her ribs as she was hurled aside, her vision blurring as she struck the council platform. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Anna's terrified cry from the healing lodge. The path to the children lay open. This was how it would end, with small bones crunched between impossible teeth, with the sound of mothers screaming their grief to an uncaring sky. David saw it all with the slow-motion clarity of crisis. The splintered palisade, the broken bodies of hunters who had names, who had families, who had laughed with his daughter just hours before. The massive creature bearing down on the lodge where Anna cowered with the other children. In that crystalline moment, memory flooded through him. Sarah in the hospital, her hand cold in his as the plague burned through her system. "Promise me," she'd whispered. "Whatever it takes, you keep our little star safe." He'd kissed her knuckles, tasting salt, making a vow he'd thought would be about school bullies and scraped knees. Now he understood. This was what it meant. This was the promise coming due. He knelt beside Anna, his hands shaking as he placed the repaired doll in her small arms. The toy seemed impossibly fragile, its stitched smile a mockery of hope in this place of death and terror. "Daddy, no!" Her voice was high and thin, the sound of childhood confronting its first real understanding of loss. "Listen to me, little star." His voice was steady, though his heart hammered like a trapped bird. "Remember what we practiced. Find shelter, find water. Wait for help." He kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap and machinery grease, and the indefinable sweetness that was purely Anna. "But most importantly, remember that your daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky." "I don't want you to go," she sobbed, clutching the doll so tightly her knuckles were white. "I'm not going anywhere," he lied with the gentle certainty of all parents who face the impossible. "I'm just making sure the monster looks at me instead of you." He stood, turning toward the creature that could snap him in half without effort. Behind him he heard Nyla trying to rally her remaining hunters, heard the wet sounds of the wounded, heard Anna's broken sobs. All of it faded to background static, one life for many. His mathematics had always been simple. "Hey!" His voice cracked across the village square like a gunshot. "Ugly! Over here!" The Gravemaw's massive head swung toward him, black eyes reflecting a glimmer of curiosity. It had been charging toward the cowering children, but this new sound, harsh, challenging, demanded attention. David ran, not away from the beast but parallel to it, drawing it from the lodge toward the empty grain stores at the village's far edge. Every step was agony through cracked ribs, but he forced his legs to pump, his lungs to drag in the thick air. "Come on!" he shouted, slapping his hands against his thighs. "Big and ugly!" Right here, the creature's attention locked onto him with predatory focus. It changed course, massive legs churning as it pursued this new, louder prey. David could hear its breathing, deep, rumbling huffs that seemed to shake the air itself. He reached the grain stores and vaulted over a low stone wall, the creature barely 20 yards behind. His plan, such as it was, hinged on the building's thick walls providing some protection. Maybe he could lead it in circles long enough for the hunters to regroup, to find some weakness. The Gravemaw struck the wall like a landslide, stone blocks scattered like toys, the entire structure collapsing in a cloud of dust and debris. David threw himself aside, feeling the wind of the creature's claws as they swept through the space where his head had been. Behind him, he could hear Nyla shouting orders, her voice strong despite her injuries. The hunters were regrouping, forming a new battle line. The children were safe, for now. The Gravemaw rose from the rubble, black eyes fixed on David with something that might have been respect. It had expected easy prey and found a challenger instead. The game had become more interesting. David backed away, hands spread, trying to look as large and threatening as possible. It was absurd. A man facing a creature from nightmares with nothing but desperate courage. But absurdity had never stopped him before. "That's right," he panted. "Focus on me. Just me." The creature took a step forward, then another. Its massive jaws opened, revealing teeth like broken glass. Saliva dripped from its tongue, pooling in the dust between them. David's back hit solid stone, one of the support pillars for the speaking tree. Nowhere left to run. The Gravemaw sensed the trap, its rumbling growing deeper, more satisfied. Then Nyla was there, bleeding and broken but moving with deadly purpose. Her spear, a new one hastily grabbed from a fallen hunter, took the creature in the side, sliding between scales to find soft flesh beneath. The Gravemaw's leap became a stumble, its roar turning to something closer to surprise. "Move!" she shouted, but David was already rolling aside as the creature's weight crashed into the pillar behind him. Other hunters joined the assault, spears striking from multiple angles, but their weapons were toys against the Gravemaw's armored hide. It shook off their attacks like a dog shaking off rain, its attention split between multiple targets now. That division of focus was all David needed. As the creature swung its massive head toward a new attacker, he saw his chance, a gap in the natural armor at the base of its skull, where the massive neck muscles met the spine. He didn't think. Thinking would have shown him the impossibility of what he intended. Instead, he moved with the fluid precision of trained reflexes, snatching a fallen spear and driving himself forward in a desperate lunge. The spearhead took the Gravemaw at the base of its skull, sliding between vertebrae to sever the nerve bundle that controlled its massive body. The creature's roar cut off mid-bellow, its legs folding as neural signals failed to reach muscle. It crashed to the ground with an impact that shook the entire village, its eyes already glazing as life fled its massive form. David stood over the corpse, spear still clutched in trembling hands, hardly believing he was still alive. Around him, the hunters stared in stunned silence. The impossible had happened. The monster was dead. For 30 seconds, hope bloomed in the village square, like flowers after rain. They had won. Against impossible odds, they had. The ground began to shake again. From the forest edge came sounds that turned hope to ash in their throats. The deliberate breaking of branches, the scrape of claws on stone, the rumbling breath of massive lungs. 3 more Gravemaws emerged from the tree line, their scales glistening like fresh blood in the firelight. They moved with the calculating precision of pack hunters, spreading out to surround the village square. The largest, easily 15 feet at the shoulder, with scars that spoke of survived battles, raised its head and released a howl that made the first creature's roar sound like a whisper. The death scent called them, Vera whispered from where she crouched behind an overturned cart. They come for their fallen pack brother. David felt something break inside his chest, not physically but deeper, in the place where hope lived. They had barely survived one creature by the grace of impossible luck. 3 was mathematics that no amount of courage could overcome. Around them, the survivors clustered in the growing darkness. 8 hunters still able to fight. A dozen villagers too stubborn or too terrified to run. And in the lodge behind them, 16 children whose only protection was walls of woven branches. The pack had finished positioning itself. The leader took a step forward, its black eyes reflecting firelight like polished obsidian. In that gaze, David saw patient intelligence, a predator that understood exactly what it was hunting and exactly how easy this would be. "Everyone to the deep caves," he said, his voice cutting through the terrified whispers. "Now, take the children and go underground where their size works against them." "We don't abandon our home," Nyla said, but her voice shook with exhaustion and pain. Her remaining hunters gripped their weapons with the desperate strength of people who knew they were about to die. "Your home is already lost." David's words fell like stones in still water. "Those aren't animals, they're thinking. They'll systematically hunt down everyone who stays. The caves are the only chance." The largest grave maw opened its jaws and roared again, not in challenge this time, but in command. The other 2 began to move, their massive forms converging on the cluster of survivors. David had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached striking distance. "Anna!" he called without turning around. "Remember what Daddy taught you about the ship's systems?" "I remember everything," came her small voice, steady despite her tears. "Good girl." He faced the approaching nightmares, his empty hands spread wide. "I need you to be the bravest little star in the galaxy. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, Daddy." It was the last conversation they would ever have. Then he ran, not toward safety, but toward the center of the triangle, making himself the loudest, most obvious target. His voice rose in a wordless shout of challenge, drawing the creature's attention like iron filings to a magnet. The pack leader's head swung toward him, lips pulling back from impossible teeth. It began to move, massive legs eating the distance with terrifying speed. Behind him, David heard Nyla shouting orders, heard the sound of people running. But not everyone was fleeing. Through the chaos, he saw something that stopped his heart. Nyla and her remaining hunters forming a defensive circle, not around the children, but around him. "Idiots," he breathed. "Takes one to know one," Nyla replied, blood streaming from a reopened wound. "Now shut up and fight." The battle that followed was chaos given form. 3 creatures moving with pack coordination against a dozen humans armed with determination and very little else. David found himself back to back with Nyla, their movements synchronized by desperation and shared purpose. A grave maw's claw swept toward his head. He dropped, feeling the wind of its passage, and came up inside its guard with a broken spear shaft. The jagged wood took it in the throat, dark blood spraying across his torn flight suit. But even as that creature fell, the other 2 pressed their attack. David watched in horror as a hunter named Kess, the elder's nephew, was caught between them, his scream cut short by jaws that could crack stone. They were losing. Person by person, weapon by weapon. They were being ground down by sheer physical impossibility. In minutes, maybe less, it would be over. That's when the ground began to shake again, but this time with mechanical precision, the deep throb of fusion engines powering up. Anna moved through the wreckage like a ghost, her small hands shaking as she picked her way over twisted metal and scattered debris. The Stargazer's hull had split along the dorsal seam, exposing the ship's mechanical heart to alien air. Sparks still danced across severed power conduits, and the acrid smell of burned electronics stung her nose. "Find the backup power coupling first," she told herself in her father's voice. "The nav computer's probably just sleeping, not dead." Her fingers found the hidden panel behind the pilot's seat, the one Daddy thought she didn't know about, where he kept the emergency repair kit. Inside, micro tools, diagnostic scanners, bypass cables thin as hair. Her father's insurance against a universe that broke things faster than they could be fixed. The main power coupling had been severed clean through, its crystal matrix dark as dead eyes. But the backup? Anna crawled into the cramped access space beneath the console, following the cable pathways by touch as much as sight. Her small fingers worked to connect the bypass cable, but the crucial alignment pin slipped through a crack in the deck plating. Panic fluttered in her chest. Without that pin, the connection wouldn't hold. Then her eyes fell on her doll's dangling button eye. "Sorry, Mama's present," she whispered, biting through the thread with small teeth. She tied the button to a strand pulled from her coveralls, creating a makeshift fishing line. It took 3 tries, her hands shaking with urgency, but finally she hooked the pin and drew it back to the surface. "Toys are tools too," she said, echoing something her father had once told her, while showing her how a simple lever could move the world. She made the connection, primary to secondary through the backup bus. Reroute through the auxiliary. A massive spark erupted from the junction, throwing her backward. Electrical fire raced up her arm, and she screamed, a sound of pure agony that no child should ever make. Tears streamed down her face as she crawled back to the console. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Somewhere in the distance, thunder spoke. Not weather, but weapons. Her father needed her. The console flickered, died, flickered again, brighter this time. Then with a sound like electronic resurrection, the Stargazer's systems began to wake. Navigation lights blinked to life along the corridors. The artificial gravity stabilized with a barely perceptible shift. Most importantly, the fusion engines began their startup sequence. A deep throb that Anna felt in her bones. She scrambled into the pilot's seat, her burned hand leaving bloody prints on the controls. The flight systems were damaged, but not destroyed. The weapons array, yes, still functional. Targeting scanners coming online. Through the forward viewport, she could see the distant glow of the village fires. See the massive shapes moving in that light like living nightmares. "I'm coming, Daddy," she whispered, her small fingers working the controls with the precision her father had taught her. Above the tree line, rising like hope made metal, came the Stargazer. Not the broken wreck David had left behind, but somehow restored, its hull gleaming in the alien sunlight. The ship's weapons arrays were already tracking, seeking targets with mechanical precision. A voice crackled from the ship's external speakers. Young, scared, but determined. "Daddy? I fixed it, like you taught me." Anna. David's heart nearly stopped. His 8-year-old daughter had somehow reached the crash site, somehow jury-rigged the ship's systems back to life. The impossibility of it staggered him. But then Anna had always been impossibly bright, soaking up technical knowledge like a sponge. How many hours had she spent in his cockpit, watching him run diagnostics, asking endless questions about thruster coefficients and power routing? Enough, apparently. The Stargazer's cannons spoke with voices of controlled thunder. Plasma bolts struck the remaining grave maws with surgical precision, turning flesh and bone to superheated vapor. The creatures didn't even have time to roar before they were unmade, their massive forms reduced to scorched craters in the village square. The ship settled to the ground with impossible grace, landing thrusters carving shallow furrows in the alien soil. The cargo ramp lowered with a pneumatic hiss, and Anna appeared in the opening, still clutching her repaired doll. She looked so small against the ship's bulk, but her eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had just pulled off the impossible. The entire village had gathered now, drawn by the sound of the ship's engines and the sudden silence where roaring had been. They emerged from hiding places like ghosts stepping into light, mothers clutching children, elders leaning on walking sticks, hunters supporting their wounded. At first they stared in stunned silence. The smoking craters where unstoppable monsters had stood seconds before, the impossible ship settling to Earth as gently as a falling leaf, and in the cargo ramp's opening, a child small enough to lift with one hand, holding a toy that had seen better days. "Witchcraft," someone whispered. "Sky demons," another hissed. But then Kira, Tam the laughing sister, stepped forward from the crowd. Her infant son was still clutched to her chest, his small face wet with her tears. She looked at David, this broken stranger who had drawn death away from their children. "He gave his life for ours," she said, her voice carrying across the square. "The Sky Father ran toward the beast so our little ones could live." Other voices joined hers, the same people who had called for his exile now shouting his name like a prayer. "David! Sky Father David! David, the beast caller, the crowd's fury, had transformed into something approaching worship. Hands reached out to touch the ship's hull. Hunters who had moments ago prepared to die raised their remaining spears in salute. Children laughed and pointed at the scorch marks where the creatures had been, already turning terror into story. "Anna the Sky Speaker," someone called out. "Anna the Thunderbringer," added another. The little girl who had fixed a broken ship was becoming legend, even as she stood there, still clutching her doll. But not everyone was celebrating. Voices rose from the back of the crowd. Darker whispers, older fears. "Witchcraft," someone hissed. "The child communes with demons," another muttered. "She violated the natural order," Elder Kess said, her voice carrying despite her age. "This is abomination, not salvation." The crowd began to split, families choosing sides. The celebration teetered on the edge of becoming something uglier. Neela stepped forward, her voice cutting through the growing discord like a blade through silk. "From this day," she declared, her words carrying the weight of law, "children's names shall be spoken aloud when speaking them saves lives. This is the new way." The pronouncement hit the crowd like a physical blow. Centuries of tradition overturned in a single sentence. "You cannot," Kess began. "I am Hunt Leader," Nyla said simply, "and I have just witnessed the gods speak through a child's courage. Who among you would call the gods liars?" The silence stretched taut. Then slowly voices began to rise in agreement. Not all. Some would never accept this change. But enough. The village had just witnessed its own transformation, written in fire and thunder. David watched it all in stunned silence, understanding that something fundamental had just shifted in this small world. Rules that had stood for generations had been rewritten by his daughter's desperate love. The taboo was broken. The new age had begun. Neela approached slowly, her face cycling through amazement and calculation. In her hands, she held Anna's repaired doll, the small battered toy that had somehow helped resurrect a starship. She lifted it high, and the crowd fell silent. "This child's plaything called down thunder," she announced. "Let it be our banner, the symbol that love and cleverness can triumph over any darkness." The watching villagers murmured their agreement, seeing the doll not as a toy, but as something sacred, a relic of the night their world changed forever. "Like the Sky Father," another added, and suddenly David realized what was happening. In their eyes, Anna wasn't just a clever child who had fixed a broken ship. She was something more, a bridge between their world and the stars, a small person who spoke the language of metal and lightning. The social hierarchy of the village shifted in that moment, invisible but profound. Children who had played with Anna now looked at her with something approaching reverence. Adults who had dismissed her as simply David's offspring now saw her as a person of power in her own right. "The Sky Road is open again," Nyla said quietly, her voice carrying layers of meaning. David looked at her over Anna's head, reading the question in her eyes. He could leave now. Take his daughter and fly away from this world of danger and loss, back to the relative safety of human space. The ship's systems were functional, the fuel reserves sufficient for a jump to the nearest colony. But safety was an illusion. He'd learned that when Sarah died. Learned it again when the stargazer fell from the sky. The universe was vast and random and cruel, but sometimes, just sometimes, it also offered chances to build something worthwhile from the wreckage. "We could stay," he said, surprising himself with the words. "The ship needs repairs. Proper ones." "That'll take time." "How much time?" Nyla asked. David looked around the village, at the hunters who'd stood with him against impossible odds, at the children peering out from their hiding places, at the woman who'd chosen to risk her life for a stranger and his daughter, at the scorched craters where the grave moths had died, and the empty spaces where good people had fallen. Years, probably. This kind of damage, it's going to be a long project. Too long for just one person. Nyla's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "The village could use someone with your skills. Both of your skills, permanently. And I could use people who know how to survive on this world," David replied. "People who understand that sometimes the only way to protect what matters is to stand together when the monsters come hunting." Anna looked between them, her bright eyes taking in the subtext of the conversation. At 8, she was already learning the adult truth that families could be built as well as born, forged in moments of shared danger and mutual trust. "Can we stay, Daddy?" she asked. I like it here. The other kids want to learn about the ship. And I think, she paused, searching for the right words. I think Mommy would want us to help these people. The way they helped us. David's throat tightened. Sarah had always been the one who saw the best in others, who believed that kindness was not a weakness, but a form of strength. If she were here now, she would have already been making plans to improve the village's defenses, teaching the children about medicine and engineering, and the 1,000 small skills that made civilization possible. Yeah, little star, he said, his voice rough with emotion. We can stay. Nyla nodded once, her expression serious. Then you're no longer sky people. You're village people. And village people protect each other. Against more grave maws? David asked. Against whatever comes, she replied. As the alien sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and violet, the survivors worked together to tend their wounded and honor their dead. The village would need rebuilding. The ship would need extensive repairs. There would be other dangers, other challenges. The sky road is open again, Neela said quietly. David looked at her over Anna's head. He could leave now. Take his daughter back to the relative safety of human space. But safety was an illusion. Sometimes the universe offered chances to build something worthwhile from the wreckage. We stay, he said. The ship needs years of repairs, and the village needs people who understand that some battles can only be won together. Neela nodded once. Then you're no longer sky people. You're village people. That night, as the fire burned low, Neela watched them from across the dying flames. She had seen a man give his life to the beasts and watch his daughter give him back to the sky. In the morning, there would be work to do. Always work when you were building a life from broken dreams. But tonight, sparks rose toward stars that no longer looked cold or distant. Anna stirred in David's arms. Can you hear me, little star? He whispered. I hear you, Daddy, she mumbled, tightening her grip on the repaired doll. I'll always hear you. Around them, the village dreamed of thunderbringers and sky speakers, of legends being born and futures being forged. But at the center of it all was something simpler and more profound, a father's love, proven stronger than death itself. He lured death away with nothing but his voice and left them silence to worship.